welcome to everyone for this event as part of our Thinking Strategically series. We've all read the HEPI report on languages, and we've all heard Baroness Cousin's great speech at the House of Lords a couple of weeks ago. There's a need more than ever before for joined up action across all educational sectors. The Department of Education is indeed working on a planned languages movement, of which we will hear more, I'm sure, in coming weeks. Central to that, and of fundamental importance to all of us, is how we work together across the educational sector. That we, of course, do so already, but it's more important than ever that we do so in bold, innovative, and highly effective ways. And today is about a stellar example of that. And so it's with great pleasure that I can introduce our friends and colleagues, Ruth Hemus, Professor of French and Visual Culture at Royal Holloway and Head of Department, and Michael Slavinsky, who is Managing Director of Languages for All. Ruth and Michael are going to talk for about 30 to 40 minutes, and we'll have about 20-25 minutes for questions afterwards. If anyone doesn't want to be recorded, then please just place your question in the chat. And thanks, as ever, to Kathy for organising everything. So, Ruth and Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. My name's Michael. I am, by trade, I'm a frustrated languages teacher trying to do something to make sure that the languages pipeline continues through A-level, through to university as well, and that we can keep in our state schools offering languages. I'm going to kick off really by telling you about Languages for All. And we're focusing in this presentation on our work with Royal Holloway and Hounslow schools. And then Ruth and I are sharing, hopefully in a relatively punchy way, 8 key lessons that we've learned and what we mean by them. And then we're really interested in your questions. So Languages for All is a charitable program housed in the RHUL Foundation. I can tell you more about the legal and organizational structures at the end if you like. But basically, it's a non-profit initiative to try and make our country one where learning a modern language is normal, possible, and valued. I think we're probably the only organization with an ambitious vision statement that includes the words normal. But it does often feel like anyone that speaks a foreign language and been through the English education system has learned some sort of magic trick. And we want to make it normal for children to learn foreign languages. We're focused on this particular pressing problem in the pipeline from primary through to degree level of uptake at A level. Something that we know has been a consistent drop, a bit of a slow burning crisis, affecting different subjects in different ways. But the overall trend is that the numbers taking A-level languages are dropping. And A-level is in many ways a gold standard. And we also know that the reason that this is an issue is that the conversion rate of A-level linguists to degree-level linguists is pretty good. So the bet that we would like to make would be that the more A-level linguists we can have, the more our language departments at university are able to recruit as well. Schools are struggling with low numbers. We know from the language trend survey run by the British Council last year that they're finding some schools are finding different ways of innovatively solve this issue. We know that about 10% of schools are already sharing classes with another school, and that's something that we promote in our hubs, and I will talk a bit about that. We know there are about a quarter of schools that are running A-levels at reduced provision. We have one school in our network where the Spanish A-level has 2.5 hours in person, and the rest the students have to do in their own time, a self-guided study, for example. So by hook or by crook, we've got some pretty remarkable teenagers making do with non-ideal arrangements. But most, as you can see from these percentages, most sixth forms will be struggling in one way or another to make A-level languages viable. And I would like to suggest to this audience that it's not just about numbers. We need to frame the issue in terms of access. We have to have a system where even if small numbers of students want to study A-level languages, they can. Even if they're the only child in their school that wants to study A-level languages, they are able to. And how do we reallocate resources in our system to make that possible? And crucially, what is the involvement of universities? And this is something that we're starting to tackle at Languages for All. The repercussions of not having enough linguists are important for schools and for universities, because we then won't have enough teachers, and we find that in the more affluent neighborhoods and the more affluent schools, students are able to study more languages. And some of the challenge is also hidden. Schools that have a languages department but are unable to give children a choice of language to study is also part of the problem. And when we think about GCSEs, the need now with the decoupling of languages from the EBAC measure at school level, we think, how can we motivate students to study languages? Well, part of the motivation might come from being able to choose a language, and many schools are not able to offer that. And so many of you here will know that university language study is increasingly accessible only to wealthier students. And this happens in 3 or 4 different ways. One is because of which students are able to access the A level and therefore more likely to convert to a degree. Another is because the universities that have kept their language courses tend to be the higher tariff universities, and wealthier students tend to score higher at A level and therefore are able to access higher tariff. But then there's, as I will go on to say, there's also a cultural dimension to which students are choosing languages, and that's something very interesting to explore. For me as a teacher, I really care about the teacher pipeline. Our current GCSE students are our future language teachers. And so it's really, really important that we build a pipeline that's healthy and diverse so that our teachers are numerous and diverse as well. So in 2022, Royal Holloway asked Hounslow schools this question, and they said, why are not so many students picking languages when we have increasingly, as Ruth will go on to say, an increasing number of diverse commuter students for lots of our other degrees? And so I went round the 18 schools in the Hounslow borough that already formed part of the Hounslow Education Partnership. And I asked them to list the reasons why your students who score high grades at GCSE don't pick the A level. We were trying to identify the barrier to this particular problem. And these were some of the reasons that came up. And I don't think there's any. I'll pause just so you can have a little read of them. I don't think many of them are a surprise, but I would like to draw your attention to kind of the different category of barrier that we have. So point number 9 is a pure structural barrier. It's a cost barrier. Whereas, for example, point number 5 is an attitudinal barrier, thinking they're not good at it. Point number 4, in Hounslow, I already speak another language. In other parts of England, that might look completely different. That might say, for example, well, the rest of the world learns English. So there's a mixture of cultural and attitudinal barriers. But there was also an area of ignorance, which I'll come to, which is students don't know about the A level. They don't know how interesting it is. They don't know about degrees, joint degrees, year abroads and things. So that gives me optimism because it feels like an information gap, which is much easier to fill rather than an attitudinal barrier to languages, which is harder to address. So if we were being simplistic, we would categorize these barriers into barriers of attitude, which is when, this isn't blaming anyone, but like some aspects of the way that the student perceives the language A level stops it being an attractive choice. And we know that's the case because students that achieve well still don't choose it. So even the kids that know they're getting top grades are not picking it. And then there's barriers of cost. And these are structural barriers. So it's a disproportionate amount for cost a disproportionate amount for schools to run a small class. Okay. This doesn't affect every school in the same way. Some sixth form colleges are immune because they're recruiting thousands of kids into year 12 every year. But a lot of sixth forms, particularly in Hounslow, this does affect. So in a nutshell, in a very simplistic way, I would say this is our strategy. We run trips to make languages fun, relevant to their futures, and appealing. And then we have a central tuition, a consortium style class that we run to make sure that even if they're the only child in their sixth form that wants to study languages, they're able to, and the school can send them to another school nearby to study the class. The reason that we're focusing on A level is not because it's the most pressing issue. I don't know how to rank the urgency of the different issues, to be honest. I'm not going to make that attempt. There's lots to do at primary, key stage 3, obviously choosing key stage 4. There's leaky moments at every point in the educational journey of young people when it comes to language learning. But I do want to say that this was when we surveyed the heads of languages in our partner schools for this pilot, we saw that the GCSE numbers were relatively healthy. Okay, so they're in line or slightly above national averages. I think national average at the moment is 46% of 16-year-olds are sitting a GCSE in a language. So we're slightly above that with 1,700 entries out of 3,000 kids for modern languages. Obviously, some of them are dual linguists, so the real number is probably slightly lower than 1,700. I'm rounding slightly in 2022. But the A-level numbers are catastrophic, right? So there's 3,000 16-year-olds that have sat their GCSE and 35 of them have gone to do an A-level in the state school. Now, maybe there's a few that have gone to the private school or grammar school or out of the borough sixth form college, but not many. So what this practically means is that in year 12 in that year, there were 3 schools that were able to run A-levels. There was Gumley Girls, there was Chiswick, and there was Heathland School. Okay, that was the case. And so we figured that was what we needed to address. So Languages for All, we went back, so the Reach Foundation, or me basically, went back to Ruth and we said, right, here's what we think the solution is. It's building some way of operating that allows us to have trips and tuition that makes languages appealing and accessible. And so we built an offer for students, which looks something like this. Okay, we start in year 11, December or January. When we know who the high potential linguists are, we invite them to the campus day at the university. There's some speaking exam practice with student ambassadors. Each school is given roughly 15 places to identify its top linguists. The students are selected. That makes them feel special. In year 12 and 13, if they need the shared A-level tuition in that middle box, then the schools organize it between themselves. And I'll tell you a bit more about that later. But there's an award, basically, which is a collection of trips that the students go on to employers, to universities, and to cultural institutions. And then there's a residential abroad, which we become so much more affordable when we're sharing numbers from across the borough. And there's economies of scale that can kick in. And then the idea is that once they're at university, they come back and inspire the next generation. And we work with current student ambassadors at Royal Holloway a lot. The campus day that kicks it off is all about making them feel part of something bigger, feeling special. So there's career networking with multiple employers that come and help out. There's tours of campus led by student ambassadors, a classic open day. And then there are taster sessions. We've taken the approach at Royal Holloway of taster sessions led by the language tutors who would be their language teachers when they start their degree. So they're meeting their future students. And we allocate students to taster sessions in languages that they have never studied before. Royal Holloway programs French, Spanish, German, and Italian. We identify which students are doing what for GCSE and put them into something different. Can tell you more about this stuff in detail, but basically this is where we're at. We now have a year 11, year 12, and year 13 sitting their exams for the first time this year. We began in September 2023. We've run a residential abroad. They were to Lyon and to Madrid last year, this academic year to Brussels and to Cadiz. We're going to have our first A-level results and the start of degrees, which I'll tell you more about. Okay. So before we go on to our lessons learned, and that's where Ruth will also reflect on the partnership and its benefit to the university. Firstly, very keen for you guys to start putting questions in the chat if you haven't already. I haven't checked, but Kathy, maybe it'd be great to, if you think there are any that are pertinent, please interrupt me. But yeah, just to pause to let Ruth, I guess, introduce yourself a little bit more and any preamble or reflections on what I've said before we go on.
Thank you, Michael. As you know, I'm head of department, but we've been doing this for several years now, so it's a really exciting moment. And seeing that all laid out on the slides that we were preparing makes me realise that we've got this kind of long-term vision and ongoing cycles. And I think in the past we were sort of sometimes flailing around a bit, trying to get in touch with schools, doing little events here and there, and not really seeing this pattern. So it's really been a fantastic project for us at Royal Holloway.
And Elsa, I'll happily share my slides after this. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, well, let's crack on. Yeah, go on. Sorry.
Do you want to do? We'll go to lessons learned, but just to say that last week we had our launch event for this year 11s, and it was just absolutely brilliant to see 190 students on campus all together, and for us to get a chance. It was like a fantastic start of term to have our student ambassadors, our language tutors. It's an all-team activity, and we've worked really well together. So should we do lessons learned, Michael?
Let's crack on. So I posted these on LinkedIn as well, so I don't know if people saw them, but we're basically going to go through each one of these as 1 or 2 slides. Some of them I'll talk to first, and some of them Ruth will lead on. And they're just reflections, really. We're going to try and make it warts and all, and reflect on what hasn't worked as well, where we've gone up some dead ends and things. But reflections on what it takes to run this relatively successfully. And I think there will be some of this probably won't be news to you, and some of it hopefully will be interesting. And maybe when we've talked about this before with different audiences, I know people have found it useful to take some of the language around how we talk about this. Because the first thing I do want to say is Languages for All isn't doing that much new. Schools already share A-level teaching. Universities already do loads of outreach. There's already both outreach and recruitment initiatives specific for languages. And what we're not saying is that nothing's being done and this is the way. What we are saying is that there is some benefit to bringing together cohorts of students and working with them over multiple years through those transitions from Key Stage 4 to 5 and 5 to degree, and that it can bring benefits both ways. So, all right, enough pontificating. So lesson 1, the university brand makes language learning more attractive to school students. So I will talk to this one. I've got 3 examples for you here, 3 photos to make 3 points. The first is that schools love trips. But if we're thinking about being a 15-year-old and being told that you've been selected because you're a high potential linguist and been identified by the university, and then being told that during year 11, the crucial year that everything's been gearing up for in secondary, that you're going to be given a day off school by your head teacher to go to a university because you're a top linguist. This emphasizes and reinforces for students what a big deal it is that they're good at languages. And once they're on campus, they realize it's not just them, that there are top linguists from lots of other schools nearby that are in the same position. And it might be with them that they'll be studying and traveling together in the future. So being selected for students is really important, but being selected to go on a trip makes it even more appealing. But being selected to go on a trip to a university makes it prestigious. And being selected on a trip to go to a university that then tells them they're special because they're a linguist makes them rethink parts of their identity. Now, in the middle, I've got a screenshot of the letter that we send to students and their parents. They open it. We try and send it hard copy always. They open it from an envelope. The first thing they see is the university logo, and then they see it's about languages. And I think that's really, really important. Look, I would say it's not so subtle propaganda in some ways, right? We're advocating, we're saying this is prestigious, come and get involved. But it's also true. These students have been selected by their teachers because they're showing the sorts of attainment that mean they'll get an A star, A or B at A level. And that's really, really important. And then the point is that we're building a pathway supported by the university. So in the bottom right, you've got a slide from my pitch deck, our pitch deck to students, which is basically planning out their life for them and saying, right, if you choose this pathway, you're going to have a really, really exciting chance, because in a couple of years' time, you'll be on your year abroad, or 3 years' time, you'll be on your year abroad. And we're just spelling out for them in a really coherent way that convinces them, as rational consumers of education, right, whether we like it or not, they're very rational in their decision making about A levels and about degrees. And we're saying to them that this is a really attractive offer. So having the university lends a heavyweight brand to support language learning and making language learning more appealing to students. The next slide is our second lesson, which is that partnering with schools can help the university in many ways. And I'll hand over to Ruth.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so for us then it's got 2 strong functions. It's outreach and it's recruitment. We have, obviously, it's lots of people involved in this as well. And my colleague, Michael Robinson, is our connection who works with the LFA team and so on. And just to be able to reach multiple schools at once is hugely more efficient than some of the activities that we were doing before. So as I said, we were often unsure where we could commit our resources. As you know, we're all we have limits on what we can do, which schools we can visit, whether it's worth it, trying to get the data. This feels like very definite investment that makes sense. Our language tutors understand better the background that students are coming from. So it's been really good for us. I mean, it's very easy to lose touch with when we're working in universities, what's happening in schools, at A-levels, GCSE. So to really get to know these students, the language tutors have been saying it's energizing as well to see what their needs are, what they're enthusiastic about, what they're interested in career-wise. I've learned a great deal. I've got a year 11 son at home doing Spanish, but that's anecdotal. And to meet all these other students, hundreds of them now, hundreds for us, has been a real learning experience for us as well. So it's kind of closing that gap. And of course, meeting the teachers and the head teachers, heads of MFL and so on. Our student ambassadors, it's great. They use their language skills. They go in to do GCSE practice in schools. And work experience at the campus events. So we have student ambassadors leading tours. At the moment we have one lead ambassador who's working very closely with the LFA team. So for them it's great as well to use, get all sorts of employability and work experience. I would say definitely that our morale has been boosted, even if I'm just talking about myself. It's obviously between me and Sarah Wright, who was the head of department last year. We know this is such an important initiative for us. Of course, the whole team believes in languages. We believe in accessibility. And this is a project that I feel really has tangible results and makes us believe in, in the future and something that we can do. So many of us are very concerned, but it's going from the, oh goodness me, languages are in decline, to a real kind of sense of purpose, an attempt at least to do something about it, which I know everybody else is in the same boat and doing lots of brilliant things. So it's recruitment to language-based degree courses. Obviously, that's where the heart lies, but also other disciplines. So we make them feel special, as Michael said. And I think that's one of the wonderful things about this program. You're special, and it's so instead of you're unusual, nobody's doing languages. It's like you're special. This is what's going to mark you out. This is what's going to give you an edge when you go looking for a job. And I think that's been a real turn in the way that we're thinking it as well. Also from it's hard studying a language, these things, these barriers that Michael set out earlier on, to you're clever, you're brilliant. There's something really special about what you're doing. So that and the same thing with having a language at home. That's also something that we should be celebrating. You have different languages, you can learn another language. So we're going to have some figures in a minute that Michael will share about recruitment, both to our degree programs and to others in the university. And that's something to sell it to colleagues as well in other departments. They come to Royal Holloway, they might go and do a joint or something else. And so we want our students to see us as the local high quality university, that they can see themselves here. And these visits help them to do that and to have a kind of connection with us, even if they choose to go somewhere else. And I'd say this when I stand up in front of them, we're not here to hard sell. It may be that you go to another university and study languages, or here to study something else, but we're giving them some sense of support and the choices in front of them so that they can decide where to go. Thank you, Michael.
I was trying to find the unmute button. Apologies. So our third lesson is, if you build it, they will come, to quote Field of Dreams, starring Kevin Costner. But this is trying to reiterate this sense of messaging. So this is a messaging lesson. So the first is, when we're talking to students, it's not just about the content of the course. It's much more about them and their identity, and saying you're a linguist and language study is the path to university or an international career. And we turn language study into a university access conversation. I think this is the main shift in messaging. You're part of this local club. You get to do fun stuff, but crucially, you're on a path somewhere. The students feel a sense of belonging because they make friends on the program and on the residentials. And through that experience, they then feel that the university might be for them. But that social dimension is absolutely key. We could put on the most amazing taster sessions and have the best marketing materials and get the most exciting shared online hybrid teaching in place. But if the students don't feel the social pull of being part of the thing, it won't work as well. And that is one of our learnings, because we haven't always got that right. But the students that are engaged are the ones that most committed to the social experience and the social side of the trips and things. And that for me is a really big learning, something we want to embed more in the future. And then just to reiterate, by informing students about the year abroad and joint degrees, and by the way, student ambassadors are really obviously good at this and better than us, it seems to inspire more to see it as relevant. So you want to, especially the link to being able to study or work abroad, I think is something that's appealing. So that's key messaging. And what I want to talk about now is kind of what that means in terms of numbers. So I'm really excited to share this. And what I'm about to show you is I'm in the middle of surveying our current year 13 cohorts. They were our first cohort 2 years ago. They launched in year 11. And I've asked them where they've applied for university, because the UCAS deadline's coming up. And so I've asked them to tell me where they've applied and for what degrees. And so I'm going to talk through these slides. So at the moment, I've only had 32 responses out of the 74 students that we've surveyed. I didn't send it out to all 81 for some individual cases. But basically, the majority of the students I sent it out to in year 13 that have been involved in Languages for All, 32 responses so far. The number of applications to Royal Holloway for languages or liberal arts degrees from our partner schools. So we've got 14 schools involved in the partnership. This year, there are, actually, I've got the years wrong, haven't I, on this? I don't know why it says 26. Oh, I think I'm talking about 26, 27. Sorry. So basically, the one in pink at the end is the year 13s this year. 12 of the 32 that have responded have applied for languages at Royal Holloway, which is amazing. And then we asked Royal Holloway we sent them the school names, and we said, how many have applied for languages from those same schools in previous years? And the peak was in 2024 when 5 of them had. And 2023, 3 of them had. So I'm going to show you this data. I think this is really exciting, and we'll see where it ends up. But even just the raw numbers, not even as a proportion, the raw numbers are ticking up. So this next slide is quite complicated. I just want to talk through it a little bit. So this is the historic data, so the last 4 years, from our partner schools that you can see on the left-hand side. And the number of students from those schools, number of applications from students from those schools for degrees at Royal Holloway. So this is all degrees that I've highlighted there. Okay, so you can see that last year, Cranford Community College, which is really near Royal Holloway, unsurprisingly, they got big sixth form, 92 applications for courses at Royal Holloway. Okay, so lots of students apply there. All right, but then this column, these 4 columns, is out of those applications, how many were for languages or liberal arts? Liberal arts, by the way, at Royal Holloway requires a language module in the first part of the degree, and most continue through to finals. So we can see out of those 92 from Cranford Community College, for example, the 4th school down in 25-26, 1 of them applied for a languages degree at Royal Holloway. Okay. So I've had 32 responses so far. So you can see in the 3rd column from the right how many students have responded to my survey from each school so far. These are the numbers of students that are applying to Royal Holloway for any course, 13 of them. And then these are the numbers in the last column that are applying for languages. So 12 of them are going to apply to Royal Holloway. A further 2 are applying for languages and not putting Royal Holloway as one of their choice. I hope that makes sense. Ruth, is there anything that's helpful to clarify? I mean, at this stage, having listened to it?
I don't think so. I mean, only to say that I hope that obviously we want to recruit Royal Holloway, but that, some of these students will not come. They'll go to nearby universities or elsewhere. So I think it is, again, a shared endeavour. And our vocation is to get students studying languages, isn't it? Hopefully with us, and but also hopefully elsewhere. Yeah.
What we're showing now is, I guess, going to lead in nicely to the next point. So the next lesson learned, which I think I can't remember, Ruth. I think we decided you would present and talk to this one first, but is that the languages department is trying to switch from defense to attack when it comes to representing itself across the university, particularly if it might be feeling under pressure at various points, right? And I think all of us on this call would like that, to have thriving languages departments, and I know some of us do and some of us don't. So this lesson is presenting solutions, not problems. I'll leave it to Ruth to talk through, and then I might have a couple of glosses to add.
Okay, thank you. I'm just conscious of the time. We've got lots of questions, so we need to make sure we answer those. But we as probably all the people familiar in the room, virtual room, will be familiar with this feeling of sort of doom sometimes. But we sort of really want to think about how we can reverse this trend, which is, as we've said, massively a collaborative effort. We've had to do this, obviously the department, lots of people in the department committed, but we've really got some important help on an institutional level. So our executive dean, Juliana Fieri, who's a linguist, former head of department, she goes out to bat for languages to senior leadership. It's something I think people are probably getting fed up of me talking about as well, but so we've had really good support from the colleagues I've mentioned there, our Executive Director of Student Journey, Nick Barrett, our new PVC Education Student Experience, Emma Mayhew, right up to Julie Sanders, our Principal and VC. And I'm name-checking them in a way because I think they've come to events. This is something else that I think maybe you'll talk about in the next slide, Michael, about being in the room and in real life with people makes a huge difference. So we do often invite our colleagues to come along to different and to meet students and teachers, and I think that's a top tip. It makes a great deal of difference rather than just talking about what we're doing. And we've had some good support in making it more visible and in all the other practical ways that we need. And that is part of our, insistence that languages, if we're a global university, we have to have languages and we have to have intercultural skills. We want that to be a long-term plan for the university. I'm making this sound like, it's a bit glib, but, we're all fighting for that, aren't we? And I'm pleased to say that we're getting lots of support for it. We're trying to make sure we align with our new strategy. We're a university of social purpose. We're reducing barriers, as Michael said. I think that's part of the slight twist that we've made, is presenting it in that way as well, that this is about welcoming different kinds of students from different backgrounds to university study of languages. And part of the way we funded it, which I'm sure is going to be one of the big questions, is the access and participation plan. And we put in a bid for that to support languages for all on that question. So that's from 2025. We've started with the funding this year. Before that, we were sort of piecing it together a little bit, but now we have the privilege really of being able to think a little bit mid to long term. And this is a good example of a multi-year project as well, rather than, as I said, this short-term investment where we're not sure if we're hitting the right targets. And trying to think of this presenting solutions, not problems, that we of course we all acknowledge this. Well, we're not saying, we've got this enormous success that's going to fix everything. But we talked about morale, feel like we're trying to do something about it as well. So that's great.
Just some concrete examples of presenting solutions, not problems, is we will collect feedback from surveys, and then whether it's Ruth or Juliana, whether it's the outreach department, they all have sight on those figures. We will disseminate those within the university and across the different boards and meetings, unprompted. And for example, where I'm thinking back to our very first year where we sort of cracked on with it in a funny sort of way. We had a green light in principle, but we were still figuring out what exactly the program would look like. And so we fed up that we had 14 schools interested, rather than asking. We had the green light to do it, but it wasn't. It was good to feed up the news just positively without making any specific demands initially. We've got 14 schools involved. We've worked out how to allocate our budget. We just pass up the good news so that when we then do need to make an ask, or do need to have a strategic conversation, it's in the framework of having heard about the good stuff that happens. One of my perspectives as a teacher, looking up at the HE sector and languages departments, is that there is there's a missing thread to the narrative about languages at universities, which is a really positive one, which is that universities have been incredibly innovative in how they offer and how you all offer languages, whether it's ab initio courses, joint degrees, the partnerships with the Year Abroad struggled on post Erasmus, and thrived, dare I say, and joint degrees. There's a huge amount of innovation going on at universities to make languages accessible. Language centres should have an honourable mention as well. And so it's really good. I think there are a lot of positives going on in the sector, and the student ambassadors, the way they can be deployed as well. And so we want to keep spreading the good news across the university. The next lesson is that partnership is relational work, and there's no substitute for meeting in person. And I saw there was a question about whether, if we could share materials in such a way that others could perhaps replicate this. But would happily share the materials and everything we've done with anyone, but it won't work unless the relationships are there. And this is our big learning. So forgive me the Brexit jargon and talking about it as an oven-ready deal, but I just thought it actually is quite a good analogy here. There's a lot that needs to be worked out in the local area. I use the analogy of ingredients versus recipes. Every hub, and I will talk to this, but we've opened very successfully in the Southwest, in Cornwall and Devon, supported by the University of Exeter, and we're talking to and hoping to open in Leeds and West Yorkshire, supported by the University of Leeds. But every hub will have some of the same ingredients, right? So groups of schools with head teacher support that want to work together, and a university that's committed. But the recipe will look different, both for how schools can share teaching and also what the need might be. And for people to feel really invested, they need to feel like they've helped co-design. And that co-design process is crucial. So we are trying to constantly meet in person. I wanted Ruth to just reflect on a meeting we had with all of the Hounslow head teachers last term. They met about something different. They're meeting as part of their local authority remit to discuss local and shared issues between their schools, and we asked to appear on the agenda. I've got a slide of Ruth's on this slide that you can see, and the broad brush strokes with which we approached this initially. Ruth, do you want to mention a little bit about what it was like to present to the head teachers and the impact that you feel that you hope that has?
Yeah, thank you. Actually, it's probably relevant because we're talking for a long time. We might have to move on quickly soon so we can get to the questions, because what I was really struck by was when they said I had 5 minutes, it was 5 minutes. And they're so busy, and I sometimes I'm conscious of how remote I am from what's happening in schools. And in the past, I guess sometimes we've gone in, we think we know what schools want. As Michael says, it's finding out, them telling us what they want, rather than us thinking we know what they need. And the range of stuff that they're dealing with is exceptional, and the amount and the speed with which they're working and reacting. So yeah, I had my 5 minutes, and the watch was out and the tapping, and and it was, and they were quickly moving on to the next thing. And it brought home to me how many different hot issues they're handling at one time. So yeah, it's really important to think to what extent are we helping and how they are also especially very tight for resource.
So let's go through the next two lessons very quickly. One is that actually this is just the headline. Without the head teacher and the senior leaders at the university saying yes, it's very hard, and we want them to say yes and then feed up the positive news and create that cycle, and we want to embed it in the school strategy and the university broader strategy. This is what can make it sustainable. Key thing we all know, I'm sure, at various points is when the personnel changes, the initiative flounders. This is what we want to resist. And then the next point is has already been mentioned, that universities can't just design outreach solo. I don't think anyone here would advocate for that approach, but it can be the default approach when the links with the schools aren't that strong and you have to do something. We did a listening exercise. We have termly steering groups where we hear from the heads of languages and the coordinators in the school side how the kids are doing, what they might need, what would be the biggest impact. An example is, how can student ambassadors help? Well, assemblies, fine, but actually we want them to do some speaking practice with the kids. So we scrapped assemblies. They don't go in to do assemblies. They go and do speaking practice with the kids. So there's some concrete examples, which we're happy to talk to in the questions. And then our final point really is that online teaching is challenging. A part of our shared tuition in Hounslow is online, part of it's in person. And we need to get better, but we're exploring some AI powered platforms, which are really remarkable. I say that as an complete AI skeptic, who is going through the process of, I don't know what the process is, but when everything you thought about the world might be wrong, and realizing that there's some really fantastic AI tools out there. But I'm mentioning that slightly because it's trendy, but also because I think there is a lot more innovative ways of teaching languages that can be done in a hybrid fashion, but also we try and always make sure that there's face-to-face at the core of it. And then a final shout out really to all of you and our plans for the future. We've launched in the Southwest with a Year 11 programme at the University of Exeter and 23 schools across Cornwall and Devon. And as I mentioned, talking to the University of Leeds, and I can see Emma's here with her colleagues, and hopefully that will be up and running in September for the Year 11s in Leeds and West Yorkshire. And yeah, it is a case of all for one and one for all. And we think that having multiple hubs will actually benefit all of the hubs and build community of practice among teachers, among universities, but also enable students to realise they can travel far and wide for their languages degrees. So that's us. I will share these slides. They'll have our contact details in them. And I think I'll stop presenting at this point.
Well, thank you, Michael and Ruth, for that wonderful presentation. It is truly groundbreaking. We have a lot of questions in the chat, and of course, people are welcome to unmute themselves and ask questions. Just put up your hand at any stage. But let's have a look at some of the questions in the chat, of which there are many. Yeah. An invitation from UCL, from Ramona. Yes, absolutely. Let's have a look at, yeah.
Should we talk about funding first?
Yeah, do.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about how the different hubs fund it. So Royal Holloway, the timing worked to get the funding from the Access and Participation Plan. So, but actually initially we got the money going from, I guess, like a pilot grant, really, from the Central University coffers that we're still not quite sure about. But basically, we pitched the idea and got some initial. No, sorry, we started funding it. The Reach Foundation basically funded my time to get going, and then the university said that they'd be able to support the Year 11 day. So it was like a few £1,000s for that day, and then we bid to be a project within the Access and Participation Plan. So until 2028, that's the funding at Royal Holloway. That is not immediately replicable at other institutions because of the way the APP funding cycle works, although some universities have Access and Participation Plan flexibility built in. At other universities, essentially the hub becomes a collaboration agreement. So Royal Holloway and Hounslow, because of the way it's set up initially, is a bit of an anomaly. And we'll see in 2028, the structure might change. But at all other universities, the way it works is the schools that sign up and the university sign a collaboration agreement, which is a contract. It's a memorandum of understanding that says, as schools we'll do this, as universities we'll do this, and Languages for All, the central team, agrees to do this. And the hub contributes a fee every year for our support. There's no money in languages. I promise you this fee is affordable. Schools pay a contribution. Universities pay the majority of it, and the schools can pay a contribution. And then that in exchange, that gives me the time to come and support with the setup and so on. But then once that collaboration exists, the flow of funds really is within the school and the university. So the university can then spend outreach or recruitment money on events and marketing, student ambassadors, all the things we've outlined. And schools can start sharing funds in order to share classes and share teaching and so on and so forth. So hopefully that gives you an idea. A hub is essentially a collaboration agreement that's contracting in Languages for All central team for support with running the recipe. Right? We agree on the ingredients, and then Languages for All will come and help with the recipe.
Great. Thank you, Michael. Ruth, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just that the APP was the thing that made us be able to do something a bit more midterm. And I don't want to make it sound like this is easy. It's been very difficult to get hold of money and resource and so on. So we'll be thinking again. We'll be thinking again, as Michael says, when we come to the end of that. But in the end, we sort of got a bit fed up waiting and just started doing things. And then, as Michael said, we were able to say, look, these students are coming to campus. What are we going to do about that? We've got this big group. So, another thing on that front is that having data really helps, and Languages for All are really good at data in a way that sometimes maybe we're not in the departments, to be able to keep coming back. And there's a question there about institutional support. I think it's something that we can't do as an afterthought. We need to keep coming back and showing, demonstrating numbers and results.
Thank you, Ruth. Elsa's question in the chat from QM University of London. I think, yes, absolutely. Michael and Ruth are very willing to come and speak to people and do so.
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to add to that? I mean, I think it's probably best to speak to individuals and come and talk, and then work from there. But I'm speaking for you, both of
Yeah,
us.
we'd be happy to. This spoke to someone at King's, and Michael's done the same. We'd be happy. Love to speak to you, Elsa. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, Joe Ford, my colleague, do you want to speak in person to your question?
I can do. Yeah, I can do. Thanks, Charles. Yeah. Thank you so much, Michael and Ruth. It's very exciting. It's a fantastic initiative. It's something we absolutely need, and it was really good to hear that it is being rolled out. But that's my question kind of halfway through, that it is being rolled out to Leeds and Exeter and hopefully more places. I suppose in terms of, you mentioned the financials and the way in which it's been supported at the kind of school and university level. So first part of my question, I suppose, could be around, could this initiative benefit from financial support elsewhere that's not just coming from a kind of core initiative or core kind of financial grant from elsewhere? So thinking about perhaps strategic funding that might be available. And then the second part of my question, I suppose it was just a thought. I can see that now that your initiative is about connecting schools as well. So it's thinking about where they don't have the capacity to teach a language, people go to other schools. I think it's great because obviously schools are best placed to be teaching languages at GCSE and A level. I think the question was really around what else universities can be doing in terms of teaching A levels, and whether we can be contributing resources, staff, time, tuition, etc.
I'm happy to take that second question. So actually both questions. On the resource question, I feel like we haven't even started fundraising for this. Like, we're a charity, we're able to. We haven't even started getting going. This is an open call. If you know any philanthropists, people interested in languages, institutional pots of money or strategic, initiatives like you mentioned, I think we would fit the brief. The whole point is that it's outreach and recruitment. With one pot of money, we can achieve two strategic objectives, and I think that's crucial in this day and age. So I'm all ears, and it's something I hope to learn from as well. With the caveat that it's really good for institutions to have skin in the game. It's really good for schools to have to pay. It's really good for universities to have to pay, because then you hold each other to account. And I think that's a really, really important mechanism. And it's part of the trust that's built, is we've made a contribution. Therefore, we get to say in what our students need, and we get a say in what's possible and what's not possible. So that's the only caveat. On the point about how universities can support schools with delivering the A level. Look, there are multiple models. Like we've got the King's College London, Imperial, Exeter, and Leeds math schools, right, to look to. Some of them are standalone institutions. Some of them are strands within sixth form supported by the university, where kids specialising in maths. Would that be something that's possible to look at if you've got those close relationships with sixth forms? I mean, shout out to UCL, and you have an academy in North London that you sponsor, right? Is this something that could be a feature of that academy, right? This is an example. I think if there's a delicate balance, which comes back to what I said earlier to Elsa's point about sharing the marketing materials, which is that you have to listen and see what's the need in the local area. It may well be that the schools are saying, listen, you can help us so much if we can directly recruit your undergraduates onto our teacher training programs. That would be the best thing. If there was a way of embedding part of the language learning experience, I think, sadly, Nottingham, I think, used to do this pretty well, is if you're a languages undergraduate, you went into local schools and you could get credits for it. What an amazing initiative. Imagine that. And then you had 3 or 4 language teachers a year that were coming into the local schools from the university. That's all it would take to be sustainable and healthy. I think this is a fantastic opportunity to think about the other areas, the student recruitment and teacher training. I don't think, weirdly enough, like it might be sometimes, but I don't think in general the solution will be like, well, we can just put on the class, right? It might be in some areas, but I think it's about supporting the schools to do it. So hopefully that speaks to your answer, to your question. There's an earlier question I wanted to go back to from Barbara Hannah about the taster session. What should a taster session include? Ruth, do you want to talk a little bit about your language tutors experience, and then I'll share my perspective?
Yeah, I think your point about we got the students to go to beginners, didn't we? Not the language that they're already enrolled on. And I just saw Alba this morning, who was saying it was completely brilliant to have that, to be giving them a sense of something, and how excited about it, because they're not sometimes when they're a little bit nervous, they're not expected to be able to do it. So something that's quite new to them. We have tended to focus on the language side more than the cultural modules that we also want to push, haven't we? We've done that through some of the visits rather than through the being on campus. So we've tended to prioritize the language taster sessions at the moment. But I think we'd like to do more, especially like with film and the BFI and Sarah's work and so on, to show that there's lots of cultural stuff as well. And then the combining with the careers has been really important, and the people coming in, apart from the taster sessions, to speak to people, to hear from people who've used languages in their careers. I have been struck, we said about finding out more about students and kids these days, even though I've got one of them, how focused they are on what am I going to do with this degree, what am I going to do afterwards. It's really important to them. I used to think it was just driven by an agenda, government and universities, but it's really important to them to see that. And I heard lots of them being very inspired by talking to people who've been through the system and hearing from other students. So again, from other students, not always what we think they want to hear, but where they're hearing other stuff.
The University of Exeter really effectively harnessed their alumni office to reach out to former linguists and invite them back to the campus day. I think they're exploring recording some of these interviews with people that have studied languages, gone on to do things that are not teaching and translating, right? Other things. And I think that's really a really big motivator. The key thing for me in a taster session is show, don't tell. So don't tell them about like how exciting it can be and so on. Like if you want to get kids excited about the fact that they can do cultural modules, one of the most effective things we did was we gave Giuliana Pieri, who some of you I'm sure know, the green light and 20 minutes to talk about Italian silk scarves and Vespa scooters. Because and then at the end she said, right, this might not have been for you, but like this is what it's like to study cultural modules. And she showed them basically some of her undergraduate slides and made them discuss kind of why the, you know, do you know why you don't sit astride a Vespa, but you sit on it like you sit on a chair, right? So all these sorts of things, like the actual subject is really interesting. And so get them to do the really interesting stuff. And then, or for the taster sessions, get them talking as quickly as possible. Within 5 minutes, get them talking in the language, because that's what's fun. And also that's what changes their perception of what might be possible. But yeah, show, don't tell. And then student ambassadors would be the only other thing to add to that. But I love that question, Barbara. I hope that's helpful and doesn't tell you sort of too many obvious things.
No, that's great. Thank you. Sorry, that's a different logic for why you might put students in a language that they didn't know. I was worried that it would be a little like you were dismissing any knowledge they already had.
Yeah. That's really valid. And one of the things that we include in our calendar of activities is a conference day focused on the speaking exam, where they come together. Actually, we do it with St Mary's University, Twickenham, who host, because they have the MFL PGCE, they get their cohort in on a Saturday from their schools who often don't have experience of teaching A-level, and they meet our linguists and they practice A-level speaking exam with them. So that's, we also do a bespoke exam-focused attainment-raising intervention. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Barbara. Yeah, just following up on Joe Ford's question, I mean, certainly the DFE might be able to find some funds for this, also subject associations. I mean, considering the national importance and the way in which you're rolling it out so successfully. Let's go to Alana's question. If you want to ask this in person, Alana, or we can look at what you say in the chat. Okay, perhaps Michael and Ruth, you might respond to Alana's question.
I need to find it. Sorry. Can you read it to us?
We find that other subjects in the faculty don't rely on the pipeline in the same way that we, languages, do, and thus work with schools is not as developed and even perceived as not necessary by some subjects. How might you thus sell these initiatives as relevant to other disciplines and thus garner more institutional support more broadly?
Yeah, I'll take that. I mean, that is a very good point. I was struck as we're sort of, when you work with other disciplines in the university and you realise that what they need to do for recruitment and outreach is very different from what we're doing in languages. You know, they might, the very successful disciplines, it's a very different picture, I think. And then success can breed success. So, how to sell the initiatives. I mean, we've been lucky to have very good support because we're demonstrating that we're being proactive and that we're trying again. We're coming with some solutions, or at least some attempted solutions. And I suppose the idea that they will come, even if they don't come to study languages, they will come to they'll study a joint degree, or they'll do a beginners or a combined. We have lots of combinations, so we're very much pushing towards, we're all on the same team, we're all on one institution, and that what we're doing can be relevant for everybody. We also think it can be a model, and other disciplines have, certainly in the humanities, that social sciences have been interested in it as a model that could be applied to different areas as well. So I mean, we've been lucky. Obviously we're going to have to look at finances down the line, but it's something that colleagues in other disciplines think we could do something similar. And we have these contacts with the schools. They just get strengthened. They get stronger and stronger. Yeah. And that that's a good thing. But we have a really strong partnership with this, and that is we have our teams behind it in widening participation as well.
Thank you. We've got a question from Rosa. Rosa, if you do want to ask this in person, do just speak. If not, we can look at the chat. The chat is about presence abroad, working or studying abroad in universities that do not teach in English. Students from other degrees will or should be needing this if wanting to spend a year abroad. So yeah, can you just talk a little bit about the presence of going abroad in what you're doing?
I hope this speaks to what the question is aiming for. So, um, on the school side of things, we try and run a residential in year 12 or start of year 13 that's affordable for every child. We've applied for Turing Scheme funding, got it first year, didn't get it this year. We're going to apply again. Maybe we'll get it next year, and maybe Erasmus will shift things. We don't know. When Ruth and I were doing our early conspiring, something that Ruth said, I don't know if I told you this, Ruth, it really struck me, was I think it was just late September, early October, and you just had your first experience that year of students that had gone off on their year abroad and come back after a week and had been overwhelmed by the experience of going abroad, had not shown some of that toughness that maybe is required when a French person or a Spanish person, whose culture maybe you don't relate to, might not have been polite to you, or you might have not navigated the bureaucracy in the right way. And those students, I think, found it really tough. And we were wondering whether it's a hangover from COVID days and sort of an insularity and a mental fragility maybe that was embedded in some of the students. I mean, we speculated, but we certainly feel like we know that when we took our trip abroad last year, out of the 53 students that we took, 4 of them had never been on a plane before, and they're now, some of them are now applying for university. I can think of one in particular because I was looking at the data just before this. It's applying for university to study languages, and we think this experience of going abroad as a young adult and for the residential, it's more than fun. It changes their perceptions of and hopefully increases their resilience and their ability to see themselves living abroad for a year. And then the final point is an obvious one, which is it's a massive carrot for picking the course. If you pick the course knowing that you get to go and do a residential abroad, it's a big motivator. And so we think students, it's why so many of us on this call chose to study languages as well, because we wanted to travel. So I think it's something that we want to try and aim for. Ruth, anything else?
No, I don't think so. I think what you say is it has been a bit complicated, hasn't it, in recent years by COVID and Brexit and all the rest of it. We always thought of it as this wonderful big selling point, and now I think we position it a bit more carefully as in for some students this is overwhelming, and it can be a very difficult thing, and depending on your background, and where you've come from and what resources you've got. So I think we're kind of positioning it a bit more carefully. Again, on the last day, I heard so much excitement about the possibilities of going abroad. Maybe we need to prepare them better. We need to be supporting them better. But I think it is still a big selling point, and something again that they can feel will make their university experience different and will mark them out. But yeah, I'm far more conscious these days of the fact that this can be potentially off-putting. But I hope that, yes, as we all know, that hopefully could be changing.
I just 2 points on growth to other universities, which I can see or other regions, which I can see some of the questions. And I think, Joe, you asked that as well. So we're 2.5 years in to this initiative, and we're at capacity, really. We're trying to figure out how we grow. So in the next couple of months, I hope to be able to write and share some approaches that I think mean that we can grow fast. I think it's urgent. I think our aim would be that we have enough capacity to support any university that has a languages department to run a hub. And we need to think what that operates like at scale. Thinking strategically, I think there's a difference within each hub between setup phase and steady state. So there's a question there about like what happens when the funding runs out. So I would like Languages for All in some ways as an organization to make itself progressively redundant, so that we go into an area to help the hub set up, we support it to steady state, and then at steady state our support might look different. It may well be that we just organize a community of practice between, for example, the people on this call that care about universities supporting A-level languages, or we support teachers, or we run webinars for students, and we do something a bit more centralized. But at setup phase, it's very relational, it's quite intensive. So I think that's kind of the aim. I think that speaks to both kind of how we plan to grow and how we figure out what happens when the funding runs out. But I think crucially, within 3 years, if we can show, as we seem to be on the cusp of being able to show at Royal Holloway, that this initiative increases the number of undergraduates that are coming as commuting students for languages and other degrees, then it pays for itself in the eyes of the bean counters. That's my hope. And so it becomes just a way of working, a more efficient way of working than trying to run outreach without this sort of steering group set up, without the school buy-in, without the meetings with the head teachers. Actually, that probably is the more efficient way of allocating resources.
Thank you. There's a question from Sarah about, would there be any scope to link teaching with complementary Saturday schools who are already investing in language learning? Yeah, can you talk to that?
Do you do anything with Saturday schools, Ruth, at the moment?
No, we don't. But I'm picking up lots of ideas on this call myself of the brilliant things that are happening elsewhere. We don't right now. It's interesting to hear about the maths initiative that you mentioned and what we can do more with A level. But we don't yet.
So I think there's two aspects to the question as I understood how it's typed out, Sarah. So on the one hand, once we get all the schools together collaborating around languages, then it may well be someone flags that they need examiners for certain subjects. They don't know where to get them. And it turns out someone else in the community does. And there's a sort of organic sharing of contacts, which is beneficial for the students in that local area. But there's another thing, which is we're trying to focus our finite resource on what's available in schools. Now, it so happens I've got a whole load of other views about the A-level qualification full stop, and I'm sure lots of other teachers do. And the university also offers ab initio courses, and potentially there's a lot more work that could be done getting kids to pick the GCSE in the first place, or primary school to Key Stage 3 transition. But we're just focusing right now, because we have to allocate and pick our resources somewhere, on that GCSE to A-level transition, the A-level to degree transition. But I think where there are successful Saturday or Sunday schools that might be helpful to the languages community, it would be up to the steering group locally to decide that that's part of their recipe. Hopefully that's not a cop-out, but that answers your question.
Yeah, there's a good point about from Elsa about anxiety when not travelling. Claudia asked a question about how can universities in Scotland be part of this project?
I'm all ears. So we need to find out. I think the principle, it's the ingredients and recipe thing. If you think there are groups of schools that would collaborate on this issue and the university brand and the university department would help, then we get them together and we figure it out. But I don't have any answers. I don't want to bluff one. But in principle, there's no limit to us working in Scotland.
There's a question from
Martha's question. 15,000 per year. Well, at the moment, we've got very different contractual setups between Royal Holloway and Exeter. Exeter essentially are underwriting it, and then the schools are making a contribution of several £100 depending on how many year groups they've got involved, and then Exeter are paying the rest. So hopefully that answers, and it's not including VAT. So for example, schools are paying £250 a year to be a partner school. If they've got more schools, it pays more of the 15,000, and then Exeter are committed to underwriting the 15,000 plus VAT. Wales too, yes, absolutely, yeah. I mean,
you have been in touch with Wales, of course.
Yes, we have, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we'll close the chat now. If there are any last question from anyone in the room, or if you want to put it in the chat, that's fine, of course, or just raise your hand if there's anything you want to come back on. Okay. Well, yeah, absolutely. Well, we'll conclude here. This has been a fantastic presentation, extremely lively, great questions across the board. I'm sure that Ruth and Michael will be receiving a lot of emails from people, and we will be coming back to this because this is, as I've said before, of very clear national, that is across the 4 nations of the UK, significance. So what we will do is possibly next year invite Michael and Ruth to come back in slightly different format, but we will certainly be following this very closely, as well as we're following what's happening across the board. Everything is absolutely connected. So a massive thank you for Ruth and Michael for their excellent presentation, wonderful presentation, and for the wonderful work that they're doing, which is for the benefit of all. So we'll conclude there, and thanks again to everyone for making this session so successful and so lively and so important. We'll be back again soon with the next Thinking Strategically seminar.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to talk about work.